Hello, everyone, and welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. It is a Friday around here, October 18th, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start doing something that I'm a little bit nervous about. I'm going to redo all of my predictions from the start of the year. We're halfway home to the end of the season, and I have a couple on here that are a little bit sketchy, but I'll get to that here in a second. Then we'll get to the players and the coaches under the most pressure going into this week, a huge week with a lot of interesting people under pressure, at least from my point of view. Then we'll get to a little of a Week 8 whip around. We have a couple of games that have already happened this week, as well as a number this Saturday that I want to get you updated on, and then one that I actually forgot to make a graphic for, but absolutely want to get on y'all's radar. Then we'll get into my best bets for this upcoming weekend. Had a very good week last week, went 6-2 on my bet, so maybe I can keep that rolling this upcoming week. Then we'll get into a little bit of an injury headline update. We'll get into that 12-man loophole from Dan Lanning getting patched, as well as a couple of different injury updates for all of the big-time games out there. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat feature at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. Click that $sign, add any question, comment you like. It'll pop up on the screen and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be interactive. We're about to get into a crazy week here, but I definitely want to get any questions you guys have. Want to get those answered before we get into the craziness. But let's go ahead and jump into this, because this is pretty nerve-wracking. Let's be totally honest. The first 6 weeks of the season have been as chaotic as anything that I have ever seen. Wasn't necessarily fully tuned in 2007, I'll be totally honest. But at the end of the day, this is going to be one of those things that I don't know if I'm more confident now or less confident, depending on how, or based on what we have seen, but it's going to be fun to kind of break this down. So first, I'll give you an idea of where every conference sits, then I'll give you my previous champion matchup and the champion, then I'll give you my new one, and we'll start with the SEC here, and this is where we stand right now. Texas A&M, LSU sitting up top, the only undefeated teams. Obviously, a lot of people worried about LSU this upcoming weekend. I like them in that game, but definitely is a very sketchy one. A&M going to Starkville, and then obviously Texas playing Georgia. A lot of this will start to work itself out over the next couple of weeks. Whoever wins LSU, Arkansas, things will get worked out a little bit there, although if Arkansas wins, maybe a little bit more chaos than we're expecting. But I do believe this will start to work itself out, and previously I did have Texas against Georgia. Felt pretty good that those were the best teams coming in. I did have Georgia winning that. I thought Georgia was going to be able to get through that schedule 11-1, something like that, and then be able to go to the SEC title. Now, I had Georgia beating Alabama, so that was the big kind of wrench that was thrown into this, and it's forced me to change some things, and frankly, I don't think people are going to like this one. I'm going to pick Texas against LSU, and hear me out just for a second here. This LSU team has been all over the place. I'm not here to argue that they haven't. What I have seen from this LSU team is they have gotten better and better on the defensive side of the ball every single week. And I think they're one of those teams that is still finding themselves offensively. I think Chris Hilton and CJ Daniels coming back this week could be absolutely huge. And that defense, I think they just have to do enough. I don't think they have to be special down the stretch of the season. When you play Alabama, you're going to be able to take care of that back end. When you play A&M, it's a little bit of a toss-up game. But if you can slow down that offense even a little bit, you'll have the openings to make plays. So I might be a little bit crazy. I could be crazy by Monday if they lose to Arkansas, but I'm going to go with the Tigers. I tried to talk myself out of it. I went Alabama, I went Georgia. I'm sticking with LSU, but I do think Texas wins that conference. I think they're going to move forward into that probably 1 seed in the CFP, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say the LSU Tigers make a pretty incredible run toward the end of the season and find themselves in Atlanta at the end of it. Oh, excuse me, apologize, I added both of them in there. That was a previous one that I had thought of putting in there, but decided against it. So definitely gives you an idea of how back and forth I was. But moving forward to the Big Ten, this is going to be a very interesting conference as we head on the rest of the way. Feels like I know who the best 3 teams here are. I think Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State are the best teams. Now, Indiana will have plenty to say if they win this weekend. A lot can happen for that team. If Illinois wins this weekend, a lot can happen for that team. So still plenty to be figured out here, and it's definitely one of those conferences that all the way down to probably about Iowa, or probably cut it at Nebraska, but I think you could go even a little bit deeper. They still have a very real shot to possibly make a CFP run. Now, earlier on, I did have Oregon, Ohio State as my champions. I felt like they were the best coming in. A little bit chalk on this one as well as the SEC one early in the season, and frankly, I have no reason to change that. I'm sorry, these are a little bit out of whack here, and they definitely should not be, but I apologize for that. The Big Ten title, I believe, is going to be Oregon-Ohio State. I do think Ohio State is going to win. I have no reason to back off this. I understand that game did not go quite as pretty as Ohio State wanted it to. I don't think Will Howard's going to make the mistakes that he's been making in past couple of weeks, so I will pick Ohio State to get this win. Moving forward to the ACC, apologies for that little mix-up there, but moving forward to the ACC, I had Miami, Florida State to start the season, and obviously Florida State was one of the worst picks that I've had all year. It was absolutely it was totally wrong, and frankly, I don't even feel too bad about it because I think everyone was wrong about what Florida State was going to be this year. But moving forward, I think when I look at this conference, there are other teams. There is Pitt, there is SMU, there's Louisville, there's Syracuse, Virginia, all of these teams. Virginia Tech, a huge win yesterday. A huge win yesterday. So a lot of teams are still in this fight. I think two teams have kind of separated to me. I think it's Miami and Clemson, and frankly, I don't love the matchup for Miami. I think if they're going to give the ball away the way they have the last couple of weeks against a Clemson team, they're going to be able to turn them into 7 points, and that's just going to be enough. Now, I do think both these teams are very well on their way to a CFP berth, but as of right now, I do think there's a couple of questions around Miami that I'm just not fully confident in, and I think Clemson just kind of, I don't want to say rolls, but I think they win the rest of their games, go to the CFP, and feel pretty good about where they're sitting, probably in that 3 spot, if I had to imagine. And then moving forward to the Big 12, a very, very interesting conference here that has probably been shaken up the most. I think we all knew that it was going to be shaken up quite a bit because BYU getting all the way up to the top was not expected. Texas Tech, the exact same. Arizona State playing really, really good football. Cincinnati being in the hunt is really, really awesome to watch. So there's a lot of different teams that are going to have plenty to say in this conference, no doubt about that. I picked Iowa State and Kansas State to face off in the title game early on in the season. I picked Kansas State to win that game. I have not necessarily changed that pick. I like these two teams more than I like anyone else in the conference. And Kansas State's the one that definitely a little bit on the edge about. I think BYU's playing great football. For whatever reason, I just can't fully buy into BYU being one of those teams in Arlington at the end of the year. Maybe I'll have, egg on my face at the end of the year, but as of right now, I'm going to roll with the same matchup. I am going to go with Iowa State to win. I had Kansas State earlier. I do think Iowa State has the weapons. I think they have every ability to do incredible things this year and probably be that 4th team in the CFP if I had to imagine from the Big 12. And then we'll get into the playoff because this one early on in the season was not very good. I'll be totally honest with you guys. I'm not necessarily super keen on this early preseason playoff predictions here because had Georgia winning the SEC, I think that's okay, at least for the time being. Had Ohio State winning the Big Ten, I still very much think that's going to happen. Miami, I think they're going to be in the ACC title, will be very much in the mix. KSU, the exact same thing. The problem is some of the at-large bids. I did think Virginia Tech was going to have more in the tank. I thought they had a ton of ability, and frankly, I do think they're turning a corner a little bit here. I think it's a little bit too late for them to possibly make this type of run, so they are definitely not in my new one. And then you have a Florida State team. There's no chance they're getting anywhere close to this, and frankly, I bought into something that I was very much on the fence about, and I just kind of dove in head first. Probably shouldn't have done that. Probably should have gone a different direction in the ACC, but at the end of the day, I did lean Florida State. Ole Miss, obviously, is kind of on the outside looking in right now. Will be an interesting thing to watch down the stretch, but at the end of the day, I feel pretty good after that loss to LSU that keeps LSU in this conversation. I do think Ole Miss is likely out of this conversation going forward. Who I have right now, Texas obviously, you got my conference champions, Texas, Ohio State, Clemson, and ISU. I think they fill out the top 4 seeds. And then I do have a couple of teams here that are a little bit interesting. I have SMU in here. I think SMU, if you look at the rest of their schedule, they are going to be favored in every single game coming forward. I think that offense is really finding something. I think in an ACC that is going to be I think the ACC, the best way I can describe the ACC right now is a ton of teams playing really good football. I don't know if they're all that good of teams. And I think when they run into an SMU, when they run into a Miami or a Clemson, it's going to be exposed. And I think SMU is going to be able to find their way through this season with 11-1, 10-2, and then maybe sneak into the back end of this playoff. I know it sounds a little bit crazy right now, but I really like this SMU team, and I'm fully buying in. I still have LSU in this iteration. I have Georgia barely making the cut at 10. I have Alabama barely making the cut at 9. It's kind of a sketchy situation there, but definitely will be one that'll be interesting to watch. I think Miami still makes it in as the other team from the ACC, and then I think Boise State is probably your group of 5 representative in this one. I had Tulane before. I was very much betting on them to beat one of the Kansas State or Oklahoma games, because then I think they would be a shoo-in. I think they'd be the favorite right now, and frankly, I think if they run the table the way they have, they probably still should be in the conversation, but at the end of the day, I fully understand why they're not. It's crazy to kind of figure this out, because the reality is these first 6 weeks, they could have taught you a lot. They could have taught you a whole lot of nothing, because I'm a little bit confused, and frankly, Texas could lose this weekend, or LSU could lose this weekend, or Oregon could lose tonight, and I could look like an idiot on Friday. I felt like this was a good time to do it. You know, you guys are more than welcome to come back on Monday and tell me how dumb I am, or be in the comments and tell me how dumb I am. I more than welcome that. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this kind of develops. Maybe I'll redo it again in a couple of weeks just to figure out where everything stands. But as of right now, I do have a couple of ers and ahs in there. I think SMU is going to make a run. I love this LSU team. I think they're going to be able to put it together a little bit more than some people think they are. And overall, I think Texas is kind of separated from the pack just a little bit. This weekend will obviously prove a lot, and if they win this one, then I'll feel much more confident about where they are going forward. But my title matchup before, it was Ohio State against Texas. I had Ohio State taking home the trophy. I'm not going to change off that pick. I feel very good about Ohio State Texas. I do think they're going to meet in the title game. I think Texas wins this one. Now, I could have egg on my face when Texas gets rolled this weekend, but at the end of the day, I do think every ability for Texas to run the table. I think Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning on that team gives you an ability to say, if your quarterback goes down, the goals of your season doesn't really change all that much. So at the end of the day, I feel really good about where Texas is. I think they're one of those teams that everyone's trying to poke holes early on in the season. They haven't played anyone, all of that type of stuff, and I tend to agree with a lot of that sentiment. I don't think it's going to matter after this week. I'll be totally honest with you. I think everyone's going to be like, okay, this is the best team in the country, and I don't necessarily expect that to change throughout the season. So I'm going to keep my national title matchup of Texas-Ohio State. I'm going to change my champion from Ohio State to Texas for this year. And then we'll get to the Heisman. My first pick for the Heisman was Quinn Ewers. Going into the season, felt really good about what he could do, and frankly, I still think he's going to make the finalist list. I think he has a number of big-time games in front of them. I think he has every ability to turn a corner here, play really, really good football, and be one of those 4 players in New York. And I think it'll be Ashton Jeanty, I think Travis Hunter, Quinn Ewers, and Cam Ward. Those are the picks that I have for the people that are going to make it to New York. I have Ashton Jeanty winning, and frankly, maybe it's just speaking it into existence more than anything else, because I love this kid. He's doing incredible things. He's doing things that I have never seen. Although Travis Hunter would tell you we've seen something like this before, we have not. It is absolutely ridiculous what he's doing up there at Boise State, so it's one of those things that I'm going to lean toward Ashton Jeanty for as long as I possibly can in this Heisman race. I can promise you that. But this is a very, very tough thing to do, because the reality is you could make the argument the first 6 weeks confused us more than it helped us in this quest, but have a couple of crazy picks in there. I do have Ashton Jeanty winning the Heisman. I have Texas winning the national title as of right now. I do have LSU going to the SEC title, and you're more than welcome to call me crazy. I very well could be, if I'm being totally honest, but I'm going to lean into that. I feel good about the Tigers going forward, and I think the SEC, with all the chaos, I think the Tigers might just be a little bit more under the radar than people think. But going to be a crazy year, definitely one that it could very well be. My initial predictions was much more right than my first ones, or than these ones. But at the end of the day, we'll find out at the end of the year. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to get into the players and the coaches under the most pressure going into this week, and there's a whole lot of them, and they're kind of in some interesting spots, and I'll explain right after this.